you've ever sat alone in your room, wondering why no one sees your pain, why your presence feels invisible, why your heart aches in a silence no one else seems to hear, know this: you're not alone in your loneliness. Not now, not ever. Before you go any further, take a breath and subscribe to this channel, because what you're about to hear might just soothe something deep within you. This isn't just a motivational speech. It's a spiritual lifeline to the Prophet ﷺ himself, whose life teaches us that even when you're left out, looked down on, or completely isolated, you are not abandoned. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ knew the heaviness of solitude. Before he was a messenger, he would retreat to the cave of Hira, seeking silence, seeking truth, seeking Allah. Not because he didn't have family, but because sometimes even in a crowd, the soul longs for something only Allah can provide. And when the world finally did pay attention to him, it came with mockery, rejection, and pain. The same people he grew up with called him names. Those he trusted turned against him. The streets of Makkah echoed with insults instead of respect. And yet he never stopped. He never became bitter. He never let loneliness eat away at his character. Why? Because he knew something we often forget, that loneliness isn't a punishment, it's a preparation. In the solitude of the cave, he met Jibreel. In the silence of isolation, revelation came down. The loneliness wasn't a void, it was the exact space where divine connection could fill him. And this is the beginning of your reminder too. You might be alone right now, but what if this loneliness is not the end, but the beginning? What if your isolation is the cave before your own form of revelation, where you rediscover your purpose, your light, where your connection with the one who sees you when no one else does? The Prophet ﷺ didn't fight the silence. He leaned into it. He turned it into worship, into reflection, into a bond with Allah so unshakable that even when he stood alone against entire tribes, his heart did not shake, because the one who stood with him was greater than those who stood against him. And that's your lesson. You don't need a crowd to validate your worth. You don't need everyone to understand you. You only need to do what the Prophet Solomon did: stay close to Allah. When people walked away from him, he turned toward his Lord. When companions were few, his prayers were deep. When support was scarce, his faith was vast. The loneliness was real, but so was the nearness of Allah. That is why he didn't crumble. That is why he became the most resilient soul to ever walk the earth. And if you follow in that path, if you choose stillness over chaos, prayer over panic, sabr over seeking validation, you will begin to experience the same transformation. Shaitan wants you to think that being alone means you're unloved. But that's a lie. Some of the most beloved servants of Allah were tested with solitude so that they could find him in ways no one else ever could. Yusuf alayhi salam was alone in the well. Musa alayhi salam was alone in the desert. Maryam alayhi salam was alone when she gave birth. And the Prophet ﷺ was alone when the first words of revelation came to him: read. Read what? He couldn't read. But that moment showed us something deeper. Sometimes the greatest clarity comes when you are most confused. Sometimes your light is born in your darkness. Sometimes when no one else is around, Allah writes your story in a way no one else can erase. This is what the Prophet ﷺ knew. This is what he lived. And this is what we must remember. Because if we forget how Solomon handled loneliness, we risk letting our own isolation consume us instead of cleanse us. Don't run from the loneliness. Face it. Sit with it. Pray in it. Speak to Allah in it. Because that's what the Prophet ﷺ did. And it turned his cave into a command, his pain into purpose, and his solitude into strength. And if you let it, it will do the same for you. And as the loneliness stretched into rejection, and the rejection turned into ridicule, and the ridicule became unbearable, he Solomon still stood firm. You see, loneliness is not just about being physically alone. It's about feeling unseen, unheard, misunderstood, even when you're surrounded. And the Prophet Solomon experienced this deeply. His words were mocked, his warnings ignored, his message dismissed by the very people he longed to save. Can you imagine what it must have felt like to have the truth burning inside of you and yet be met with silence, laughter, and resistance? But here's the thing, he didn't stop because of rejection. He transformed through it. That's what you need to understand. When you feel the sting of being overlooked, dismissed, or betrayed, remember, you are walking a path your Prophet Sallallahu walked before you. And he didn't break, he rose. That's the lesson. Shaitan doesn't want you to internalize. He wants you to confuse rejection with worthlessness. But the Prophet ﷺ teaches us the opposite. Rejection is often a redirection, not a reflection of your value. He ﷺ was rejected by his tribe, but accepted by his Lord. He was mocked by the world, but honored by the heavens. When people turned their backs, Allah opened the skies, and that should shake you awake, because every no, every door shut, every time they walk away, it is not abandonment, it is divine selection. The Prophet ﷺ knew this because in the deepest moments of isolation, he was gifted with the most intimate relationship with Allah. Rejection became his training ground for resilience. Every insult refined his humility. Every exile sharpened his clarity. Every betrayal pushed him closer to the only one who never leaves. And this is the loop you need to hold on to. When people distance themselves from you, Allah is drawing you near. Again and again. He's removing the noise so you can hear him clearer. He's silencing the crowd so you can recognize his whisper. That's how the Prophet ﷺ handled loneliness. He didn't fill it with distractions. He filled it with devotion. And the same choice lies before you. When you are isolated, when they forget you, when the phone is quiet and the nights are long, what will you do with the silence? Will you numb it with distractions, or will you sanctify it with sujood? Because in every lonely night the Prophet ﷺ experienced, he didn't complain, he conversed. Not with people, with Allah. He ﷺ spoke to the one who already knew his pain, already knew his patience, and already prepared his victory. That's why he could endure what would break others. Because his soul was never anchored in the approval of the world. It was anchored in the pleasure of his Lord. That's the secret. When the Prophet ﷺ felt the pain of being left out, he didn't run toward the people who rejected him. He turned to the Lord who always embraced him. And you can do the same. Right now, the next time you feel like you don't belong, like no one checks on you, like your presence wouldn't be missed, remember the Prophet ﷺ. Remember how he stood alone in the streets of Taif, bleeding and broken, rejected by an entire city. Yet in that moment, with no one around, he made the most beautiful dua, a plea not for revenge, but for mercy, a whisper not of anger, but of surrender, because his heart knew Allah was enough, and that's what gave him strength when no one else did. That's what gave him courage when fear was natural. That's what gave him light when darkness surrounded him. His loneliness was not a trap. It was a tunnel to something greater. It was the path to clarity, conviction, and closeness to Allah. And yours can be too. So when you feel alone, stop seeing it as punishment. Start seeing it as permission to slow down, to reconnect, to reflect, to rebuild. Because every prophet was tested with solitude, and every one of them emerged with strength. You are not broken because you are alone. You are being built. And what comes next, if you stay steadfast like the Prophet ﷺ did, will be something no soul can steal from you. A connection so deep, a faith so strong, and a peace so unshakable that it carries you even when the world cannot. So now we come to the final truth, that the Prophet Sallallahu didn't just survive loneliness, he sanctified it. He turned the weight of isolation into the light of revelation. And what began in the darkness of a cave became the light that now guides 1 billion hearts. You see, the Prophet Sallallahu never feared solitude, because he knew what we often forget, that being alone with Allah is never truly being alone. And the most beautiful part of his legacy is that it started when he was by himself. Before the miracles, before the migration, before the Medina welcome, there was silence, there was a cave, there was a heart aching for truth, and a soul ready to carry the heaviest of burdens. If you're there right now, if your soul is heavy, your heart is tired, your hands are empty, and the world feels like it's spinning without you, then know you're exactly where transformation begins. Just as the Prophet ﷺ was, because the cave was not a place of weakness. It was the birthplace of strength. That solitude, that silence, it prepared him, and it will prepare you too if you allow it. If you stop resisting the loneliness and start resting in it. If you stop asking why it's happening and start asking what Allah wants to teach you through it. The Prophet ﷺ never let loneliness shrink him. He let it shape him. He taught us that true strength is not the absence of loneliness, but the ability to carry it with grace, faith, and dignity. He never lost himself to bitterness. He never begged for validation. He never doubted his purpose just because people walked away. And you shouldn't either. Because what he left behind is not just a religion, it's a roadmap. A roadmap for the broken, the tired, the isolated, the rejected. For those who feel too soft for this world, too quiet to be noticed, too overwhelmed to be understood. The Prophet ﷺ showed us that greatness often begins with a quiet heart, a sacred dua, and a moment alone with Allah. That your value isn't in how many people follow you, but in how sincerely you follow the one who created you. He from the cave to the crowd, from silence to sunnah, from isolation to leadership. But his heart always remained anchored in that same divine connection, whether alone or surrounded. He belonged to Allah. And that's the legacy. That's the blueprint. Don't measure your worth by the noise around you. Measure it by the stillness within you. Don't let loneliness convince you that you are forgotten. Let it remind you that you are being personally tutored by Allah in a classroom of silence. Because what the Prophet ﷺ left us is more than history. It is healing. More than biography. It is blueprint. More than inspiration. It is instruction. And every moment you spend alone is a mirror of what he once endured, so that you would know how to walk this path with faith instead of fear. The Prophet ﷺ didn't just carry the message of Islam, he carried the emotional blueprint of how to survive heartbreak, betrayal, silence, and solitude. And he carried it so beautifully that now, centuries later, you and I still find comfort in his example. So when you're crying in sujood and no one knows what you're going through, when the nights feel endless and your phone never rings, when your presence feels like absence to the world, remember the Prophet ﷺ. Remember that he felt it too, and he turned that pain into prayer, that emptiness into elevation, that silence into strength. What was his secret? He knew that the one who sees your loneliness is the one preparing your legacy. And you, my dear soul, are not forgotten. You are in the cave now, but revelation is coming. You are in silence now, but divine comfort is near. You are alone now, but you are being shaped into someone who will one day look back and whisper, that loneliness didn't break me. It built me, just like it built him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Keep walking, keep whispering, keep waiting on Allah. Your story is not over. It is just beginning. And like his sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it begins with loneliness, but ends in light.